When I was a junior in college, I lived in a fraternity house with more than 40 other guys. As you might imagine, finding any personal time to study, relax, or simply enjoy peace and quiet was nearly impossible. The constant noise, late-night antics, and overcrowded living conditions wore on everyone. That December, as the semester hurtled toward final exams and the much-anticipated Christmas break, one of my friends suggested we escape for a weekend of relaxation. His family owned a cottage up north, a few hours' drive from campus in Michigan, and he promised it would be the perfect place to unwind. The idea of getting away, even for just a couple of nights, sounded like heaven. The thought of a cozy cabin, far removed from the chaos of fraternity life, felt like the reprieve we all desperately needed. We loaded up the car one snowy afternoon and began our journey north. The drive itself was beautiful. Snow fell in soft, lazy flakes, blanketing the trees and fields in a pristine white. My friend chatted excitedly about the cottage, painting a picture of a quaint retreat nestled in the woods beside a frozen lake. As we pulled up the long driveway, the scene unfolded just as he'd described. It was like stepping into a Thomas Kinkade painting. The cottage's exterior lights reflected off the freshly fallen snow. The tall evergreens stood like silent sentinels, and the frozen lake glimmered faintly in the distance. The property had a history, as my friend explained. His family had bought the cottage a few years earlier from an elderly couple who had passed away. The couple had lived there for decades, and while the house had always intrigued his family, there were whispers among the locals that the place was haunted. Something about the way it sat back from the lake, hidden in shadows, lent it an eerie quality. But my friend brushed off those rumors. "Just old stories," he said with a laugh. We trudged through the snow, laughing and joking as we carried in bags of groceries. Inside, the cottage was everything we had hoped for: warm, inviting, and steeped in the charm of a bygone era. It felt like stepping into a grandparent's house, with worn but comfortable furniture, a crackling fireplace, and shelves filled with mismatched knickknacks. We wasted no time settling in. I took charge of dinner, marinating steaks and preparing shrimp. For college students accustomed to living on instant ramen and macaroni and cheese, the freezer stocked with quality meats felt like an unexpected jackpot. The fire roared in the hearth, and the soft hum of a local radio station filled the air. Outside, snow continued to fall, adding to the picturesque serenity. We were in high spirits, relishing the rare luxury of good food, good company, and a cozy refuge far from the stress of exams. To set the scene, the cottage sat about 50 yards from the lake on a slight hill. The nearest neighbor was over half a mile away, and the driveway stretched 300 yards from the main road. Surrounded by dense woods and fresh snow, we were completely isolated. The snowfall had left a thick, unbroken layer of snow around the house, and the exterior lights illuminated the pristine blanket. If anything or anyone approached the house, their tracks would be immediately visible. As dinner cooked, we poured drinks and reveled in the moment. The radio played the Police's "Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic," and we cranked up the volume, dancing and singing along. The warmth of the fire, the smell of sizzling steak, and the sound of music created a perfect moment until it wasn't. It happened just as the song hit its peak. 3 loud, deliberate knocks on the back door shattered the tranquility. The sound was so jarring, so unmistakable, that it stopped us in our tracks. The laughter died, the music seemed to fade, and we all exchanged wide-eyed, confused glances. "Who the hell could that be?" someone whispered. We were miles from anyone, and the snow outside should have deterred even the most determined visitor. My friend, whose family owned the cottage, hesitated only briefly before hurrying to the back door. Moments later, he came sprinting back into the room, his face pale. "Someone's in the house," he choked out. His words sent a wave of icy fear through me. The back door was ajar, swinging slightly in the cold wind. Someone had knocked, announced their presence, and then slipped inside. My mind raced with questions. Who were they? What did they want? Were they armed? Gripped by fear, we armed ourselves with whatever we could find. Fireplace pokers, kitchen knives, even heavy candlesticks, and began a room-by-room search. The house was small, but every creak of the floorboards and shadowy corner made the hairs on my neck stand on end. Despite our thorough search, we found no one. Returning to the living room, we turned our attention to the snow outside. Surely there would be tracks leading up to the house. But as we peered out the windows, we saw nothing. The snow on the deck and walkway remained untouched. There were no footprints, no signs of anyone or anything approaching the house. We stood there, dumbfounded. The knocks had been real. They were loud enough to startle us all. And yet, there was no evidence of an intruder. The only explanation that seemed to fit was one we didn't want to accept. Whatever had knocked on that door wasn't human. The rest of the evening passed in uneasy silence. The meal, once so highly anticipated, was eaten in subdued bites. None of us wanted to be alone, so we all crammed into the master bedroom, dragging blankets and pillows with us. The fire in the living room died down, but none of us dared venture out to stoke it. The thought of disturbing whatever or whoever lurked in the shadows was too terrifying. When morning finally arrived, the fear that had gripped us the night before began to wane, but it didn't disappear entirely. We packed our things quickly, eager to leave the cottage and its eerie presence behind. As we loaded up the car, we glanced back at the snow surrounding the house. It was still untouched, as pristine as it had been the night before. The drive back to campus was quiet. None of us spoke much, each lost in our own thoughts. The experience had shaken us in ways we didn't fully understand. To this day, I can still hear those 3 knocks. They weren't just a sound. They were a message, a warning, or maybe something even darker. Whatever it was, it made its point, and I'll never forget it. The first time Alex introduced me to the dark web, I was mesmerized. Beneath the sanitized surface of the internet, there existed a hidden expanse where forbidden knowledge, unspeakable crimes, and secrets too dangerous for daylight thrived. At first, my introduction into this world was innocent enough. Tutorials on coding, an occasional peek at the peculiar, and, admittedly, a fascination with the taboo. But today, everything changed. Today, I found something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. It began when I moved to a new town just before starting high school. My parents insisted the move was for our safety. They were fleeing the shadow of a series of grisly murders that had unfolded in our previous town. Crimes that had shaken the community to its core. To me, it felt excessive. A string of killings was disturbing, sure, but the decision to uproot our entire lives over it seemed dramatic. I didn't question them at the time. I was too focused on adjusting to the isolation of being the new kid. Then I met Alex. He was the first person who really made the new town feel bearable. We bonded over a shared love of the internet, though our interests diverged. I was hooked on games and online communities, while Alex had a knack for the technical side of things. He was a natural coder, always tinkering, always curious. His curiosity was what made him different, and as I would later learn, dangerous. For years, Alex and I were inseparable. His obsession with the dark web grew slowly, almost imperceptibly, until it became a defining part of his identity. I thought it was harmless. Strange, maybe, but harmless. I couldn't have been more wrong. One morning, I woke to the relentless buzzing of my phone. Groggy, I squinted at the screen to find a barrage of messages from Alex. He wasn't the type to send long texts, let alone dozens, so my stomach churned as I opened them. Each one radiated urgency, a frantic plea for attention. The messages painted a clear picture. Something was wrong. My parents were at work, leaving me free to head to Alex's house immediately. As I approached, unease settled over me. 4 police cars were parked outside, their flashing lights casting a surreal glow on the scene. Neighbors had gathered in clusters, whispering and craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the commotion. Among them, I saw news vans, reporters, clutching microphones and jostling for position. It was chaos. I pushed through the crowd, my heart pounding in my chest. Alex's mother stood on the porch, her face pale and streaked with tears. She waved me inside, her voice trembling as she explained. Alex was missing. Her words hit like a blow to the chest. Missing. The word reverberated in my mind, too large, too incomprehensible to process. How could Alex be gone? I had heard from him just hours earlier. His frantic texts felt like breadcrumbs, a desperate attempt to lead me to some understanding of what was happening. But they only deepened the mystery. Inside the house, detectives moved with quiet urgency. Their clipped tones and furrowed brows betrayed their efforts to appear calm. I wanted to scream at them, to demand answers, but I knew they had none. Instead, I sat in the living room, numb and helpless, as Alex's parents clung to each other in grief. My thoughts kept circling back to Alex's texts. What had he been trying to tell me? Was there something I was missing? Some piece of the puzzle that might explain his disappearance? My resolve hardened. I needed to know the truth. While the adults were occupied, I slipped upstairs to Alex's room. The air inside was heavy, the room eerily untouched. His computer sat on the desk, its monitor glowing faintly in the dim light. It felt like an invitation, a doorway into the mind of my missing friend. With trembling hands, I turned on the screen. Tabs flooded the browser, an overwhelming cascade of articles, forums, and encrypted links. At first, the content seemed ordinary, technical guides and programming forums. But then, the tone shifted. A series of articles about unsolved murders filled the screen, each one more horrifying than the last. Acid, mutilation, bodies left in states so grotesque I could hardly read the descriptions. Images accompanied some of the articles, their graphic details searing themselves into my mind. Then I saw it. One article described a murder from 2 years ago, the same murder that had driven my family to move. My blood ran cold as I absorbed the details. The victim was our old neighbor, a kind woman whose smile I could still remember. The method of her death matched the others: mutilation, acid, horror. Panic rose in my chest as my eyes darted across the screen. How did Alex know about this? I had never told him, never even mentioned it, and then I saw it. In one of the tabs, a search field glowed faintly. My last name filled the bar. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My mind raced. Why was Alex searching my name? What had he found? And why had he been so desperate to contact me? I bolted out of his room, my heart hammering in my chest. I mumbled something about dinner to his mother and left, the weight of the discovery suffocating me. Back home, I locked myself in my room and fired up my own computer. My hands trembled as I typed my last name into the dark web search bar. The screen remained blank for what felt like an eternity, mocking me with its silence. Then, slowly, it began to load. When the page finally appeared, I froze. Hundreds of videos filled the screen, each marked with cryptic, chilling titles. Dread pooled in my stomach as I clicked on the first. The video opened to a dimly lit basement. A woman sat strapped to a chair, her panicked breathing audible, even through the grainy audio. My stomach churned as I recognized her. It was our old neighbor. The heart-shaped tattoo on her neck confirmed it. Two figures entered the frame. My parents. My father held a knife, my mother a scalpel. They moved with horrifying precision, their faces cold and detached, as they began their gruesome work. I couldn't look away, even as my mind screamed at me to stop watching. Her screams, her final moments, the blood, it was all too much. But the video kept playing, documenting every horrific detail until she was gone. Tears streamed down my face as the video ended. I wanted to shut the computer, to erase what I had seen, but I couldn't. I scrolled through the list, each video more horrifying than the last. My parents' faces appeared again and again, their cruelty immortalized on the screen. Then, at the bottom of the page, I saw it. A new upload, timestamped just hours earlier. My heart pounded as I clicked it. The screen filled with the familiar basement. This time, a man sat in the chair, his head covered with a sack. My parents entered the frame, their tools glinting in the dim light. My father reached forward and yanked the sack from the man's head. It was Alex. The video cut to static, but the image of Alex's terrified face was seared into my mind. He had tried to warn me, to save me from the truth. And now, because I hadn't listened, he was in that chair. My parents weren't just hiding a dark secret. They were monsters, and I had to stop them. Never sleep on New Year's Eve. It was something my mother always told me, a rule passed down with an urgency I never fully understood. As a kid, I thought it was just her way of keeping me awake so I could play the dutiful host during her annual New Year's parties. She loved having her friends over, drinks flowing, cards dealt, laughter filling the house. And there I was, the reluctant runner, refilling glasses, topping off plates of cheese and crackers, and doing anything else she asked. When the clock struck midnight, the guests would leave, and I'd be sent straight to bed. For years, I believed that was the only reason behind her insistence. But now I know better. Now, I understand that her warning wasn't just a quirky tradition. It was a lifeline. I'm older now, living with friends in a house we rented together. I work a draining job with awful hours, covering shifts for everyone who quits or simply doesn't show up. The overtime was relentless, but I was too naive to say no. It wore me down, slowly but surely, until I felt like a shadow of myself. So when New Year's Eve rolled around, and I finally got off work early, I thought I'd reward myself. My friends and I cracked open some beers and settled in front of the TV, watching the Times Square countdown. The room was filled with a warm glow from the fairy lights strung up for the holidays. And for the first time in a long while, I felt at ease. But exhaustion was pulling at me. By 10 p.m., my body felt like it was shutting down. I fought against it, tried to push through, but it was a losing battle. Finally, I stood up, announced I was heading to bed, and trudged upstairs. The sounds of laughter and clinking bottles faded as I collapsed into my mattress. Sleep came quickly, lulling me into a dream so vivid and serene that it felt like a reward for all my hard work. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through my window. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that feels wrong, like a sound vacuum where life has been erased. Stretching, I made my way downstairs, expecting to see my friends groggily recovering from the night before. Instead, I was met with a scene of disarray. The living room was a mess. Empty beer bottles, scattered chips, overturned chairs. I called out for Lauren, one of my roommates, but there was no answer. Thinking she might still be asleep, I checked her room. Empty. I tried Nikki's door. Same thing. I even went outside to see if their cars were gone. They weren't. The frost on the windshields was untouched, glittering under the winter sun. My breath puffed in visible clouds as I looked up and down the street. No cars, no movement. Not even the faint hum of distant traffic. This was strange. Our street was always busy, even on holidays. Unease prickled at the edges of my mind. I peeked into the neighbors' houses, hoping for some sign of life. Their cars were all parked in their driveways, but their homes were still. No lights, no movement. It was like the world had pressed pause, and I was the only one left unscathed. Panic set in as I rushed back inside. I turned on my radio, a Christmas gift I hadn't yet unboxed, hoping for a morning talk show, or even static to break the silence. Nothing. Just dead air. Desperation clawed at me as I grabbed my keys and jumped into my car, determined to find someone. Anyone. I drove for miles, passing through neighborhoods, strip malls, highways. Everywhere I went, it was the same. Empty. Restaurants, grocery stores, even downtown streets that should have been bustling were barren. Not a soul in sight. The world was a hollow shell. Finally, I checked my phone. No calls would go through, no text would send. But one thing caught my eye. The date. January 1st, 2021. My heart sank. The realization hit like a freight train. I was trapped. Somehow, impossibly, the year had repeated itself. Everyone else was gone. And I was stuck in this endless loop of silence. At first, the loneliness was suffocating. I wandered through the days in a daze, unsure of how to process what had happened. Then, as the weeks stretched into months, the emptiness became a strange sort of freedom. With no one around, I explored abandoned buildings, stayed in luxury hotels, and roamed celebrity mansions. I took whatever I wanted from stores, indulging in the kind of excess I'd never dreamed of. But the novelty wore off. By the third month, the reality of survival set in. Perishables spoiled, leaving behind a stench that made the grocery stores unbearable. I lived on canned vegetables and frozen meals, their monotony gnawing at my sanity. By month 5, the loneliness had become an ache so deep it felt physical. I missed the sound of other voices, the comfort of human connection. I began talking to a stuffed dog I found in a toy store. I named him Brian. Together, we hatched a plan to travel to all 50 states and document every iconic site. For months, I drove across the country, snapping photos with Brian as my only companion. But when I finished, the emptiness returned. I had done everything there was to do. By month 11, despair consumed me. I thought about ending it all, hoping that death might release me from this endless purgatory. But then, a thought sparked. If there was a way in, there had to be a way out. I clung to that hope, convincing myself that if I made it to the next New Year's Eve, I might break the cycle. That's when I saw them. It started as a shadow on the horizon, something too large to be human. As it approached, I saw its form, a towering figure over 9 feet tall, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its voice was a distorted echo of English, garbled and alien. There wasn't just one. More appeared, their their silhouettes blotting out the landscape. They were searching for something, for someone, for me. Instinct took over, and I ran. I didn't stop to think, didn't look back. My lungs burned as I sprinted through empty streets and abandoned highways, the creatures' voices echoing behind me. They were relentless, always just out of sight, but never far enough away. Now is December 21st, 2021. I've been on the run for weeks, hiding wherever I can, moving from place to place in a desperate bid to stay ahead of them. They're getting closer. I can feel their presence, their unnatural eyes tracking my every move. I don't know if I'll make it to the end of the year, but I have to try. If you're reading this, heed my mother's warning, the one I foolishly ignored. Never sleep on New Year's Eve.